Picking up from our last discussion on Durkheim's take on class structure, let's now turn our attention to a foundational concept he helped solidify: society itself. Now, here's a little twist: that word society, when Durkheim first started using it, wasn't exactly what we think of today. It was more like a fancy metaphor, a way to make sense of something new and confusing. Think about it. 2 centuries ago, the world was changing fast. People were moving around more, cities were getting crowded. It was all very new. So sociologists grabbed the word society, which already meant things like fellowship, companionship, or groups with a shared purpose, and used it to describe this buzzing, complex human environment. They hoped it would highlight the basic fact that people were living together, interacting, sharing space, even if the old ways of connecting were fading. Now, why use a metaphor? Because metaphors are great tools for thinking. They help us grasp something fuzzy by comparing it to something clearer. The original meanings of society, being in company, having a group with a purpose, gave sociologists a foothold. They saw this new reality: lots of people packed close together, constantly moving, bumping into each other. It felt like being in company, right? But there was a catch. Unlike the old days where you knew your neighbors, belonged to a tight-knit community, this new closeness often lacked deep sense of belonging, that unspoken moral bond. You could be physically near someone, but more distant. It was like having a crowded room where everyone's just passing through, not really part of the same team. So, calling this new state society was a bit of a stretch, an interpretation. It was saying, hey, despite the weirdness, it's kind of like society. And this act of naming, this metaphorical application, actually set sociology's biggest task: figuring out how to rebuild that sense of connection, that moral fabric, in this new fragmented world. It was a massive challenge for the sociological imagination. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While Durkheim was using this metaphor, he himself came to believe that society wasn't just a metaphor. He argued it was real, really real. He wrote about social facts, things like laws, religious beliefs, moral codes, and insisted they were as tangible, as solid, as any physical object. He said they had coercive power over us, meaning they could force our hand, shape our behavior, even if we didn't like it. For Durkheim, society was a thing, a powerful force in the world. Fast forward a few decades, and along comes Benedict Anderson with his brilliant idea of the imagined community. Suddenly everyone nods and says, aha, society is imagined. But wait, wasn't Durkheim arguing it was real? What gives? Well, Anderson nailed it precisely when the image of society was starting to feel less real, when the connections felt weaker, when the metaphor started to fray. It's like Heidegger's point: sometimes you see the truth when things go wrong. Or, as the owl of Minerva flies, you only fully grasp reality looking back at dusk. Maybe society spent most of its life wearing the disguise of reality so well that nobody questioned its imagined nature until the foundations started to shake. So how did Durkheim argue society was real? He laid out a compelling case based on what he called social facts. These weren't just ideas floating around in people's heads. They were external forces like gravity or air pressure. Think about them: laws, religious doctrines, economic systems, even fashions. Durkheim said these social facts behave like physical objects. They exist whether you believe in them or not. You can't just wish away a law or a social norm. Try ignoring traffic rules, or religious taboos, or the expectations of your job, and you'll quickly learn the hard way that these facts have teeth. They resist you, they push back, they impose sanctions. Durkheim famously stated that reality is recognized by the power of external coercion. If something consistently pushes back against your individual will, forces you to conform, punishes deviation, then it's real. And for Durkheim, that something was society, embodied in these social facts. Ignoring them? Painful awakening awaits. It's like trying to walk through a locked door. The door doesn't magically disappear because you don't want to hit your head. Now, why was proving society's reality so crucial for Durkheim and early sociology? Imagine trying to get a seat at the academic table in late 19th century France, especially under the sway of positivism. Positivism was all about hard, observable facts like those found in physics or biology. Sociology, this new kid on the block, needed to prove its worth. It had to show it dealt with real stuff, not just airy-fairy ideas. First job: demonstrate that social facts were as real and solid as any other scientific data. Durkheim's argument about coercion was key here. Second job: draw clear lines. Where does sociology end and psychology begin? Durkheim argued fiercely for separation. Why? Because social facts, he claimed, had an objective existence independent of individual minds. They weren't just collections of individual thoughts or feelings. To understand a social phenomenon, you had to look at society itself, its structures, its history, its collective consciousness, not just dissect individuals. The cause of a social fact, he insisted, lies elsewhere in other social facts, not in what's going on inside people's heads. It was a declaration of independence for the fledgling discipline. But there was another layer to this drive to define and control society. Think about the anxieties of the time. Old certainties were crumbling, traditional communities, established hierarchies, the church's grip loosening. There was a widespread feeling that things were falling apart, melting the solids, profaning the sacreds, as some observers put it. The old model of kings acting like gamekeepers, just protecting their domain and extracting resources, wasn't cutting it anymore. Society seemed fragile, needing constant attention. This bred a managerial mindset. Instead of just reacting, people wanted to actively manage society, design it, police it, make it predictable and controllable. It was like moving from letting nature run wild to meticulously tending a garden. The goal was to eliminate chance, ambiguity, and contingency. If society could be managed, understood, and directed, perhaps those pesky problems of disintegration could be solved. And sociology, in its infancy, was tasked with figuring out how free will, seemingly chaotic individual choices, somehow produce these stable, coercive social patterns. The ultimate aim? To master society, and through it humanity itself, guiding individuals towards the desired path dictated by reason or nature. This managerial impulse also tackled a huge existential crisis, the loss of God. Secularization meant the old source of absolute morality and meaning was gone. What held society together? Durkheim offered a radical solution: deify society itself. First, he argued that God was never really separate from society. Morality always reflected society's needs and values. Society was the true source, and God was just a fancy symbol for it. So strip away the divine veneer, and society remains the foundation. But then, how do you get the authority that God provided? How do you ensure obedience without divine command? Durkheim proposed making society itself like God. Give it irresistible authority, make it seem permanent and trustworthy, let it act as the final judge, and keep it somewhat aloof, transcendent. Society becomes the new moral legislator, the ultimate arbiter of good and evil, replacing the withdrawn deity. It's a clever move. Solve the problem of secular morality by creating a secular God. Why make society like God? Because humans crave more than just fleeting pleasures. As Pascal noted, contemplating our brief existence against the infinite void is terrifying. We need meaning that lasts beyond our mortal coil. Durkheim argued this is fundamental. We need actions whose consequences ripple outwards, whose significance endures. Religion, with its promise of an immortal soul, fulfilled this. But what if religion fades? Durkheim saw society as the answer. Society, in the form of family, city-nation, is vastly more durable than any individual life. By investing in society, participating in its projects, contributing to its continuity, we tap into something eternal. Our brief lives become threads in a much longer tapestry. Society offers a bridge to immortality, a way to transcend our own mortality. This durability became a cornerstone of Durkheim's legitimacy argument. Society commands because it endures, offering a stability that individual lives lack. In a world losing faith in divine permanence, this earthly eternity was a powerful lure. Here's a fascinating paradox Durkheim presents. He argues that submitting to society, accepting its norms and rules, is actually the condition of true freedom. Freedom, for Durkheim, isn't doing whatever you want, it's liberation from the blind, unthinking forces of nature and chance. Society, with its intelligence and collective wisdom, provides the shield against these forces. So, dependence on society is liberating dependence. Sounds contradictory, right? But remember the context. This was early modernity, a time of confidence before the darker sides of total control became obvious. Society was seen as the good guy, the force for order and morality, fighting against chaos. The idea of Big Brother hadn't fully crystallized. Submitting to society felt like choosing order over anarchy. The critique here is that this view conveniently overlooks how society, once empowered, could easily turn oppressive, using the very same language of liberation from chaos to justify control. Durkheim's vision of a solid, reliable society rested on certain experiences. People felt the constant, subtle pressure to conform, the sense of security provided by collective welfare systems, and the comforting belief that institutions like the state or church would last for generations, providing stability for lifelong plans. These experiences reinforced the idea of society as a caring company. But then cracks began to appear. As the 20th century dawned, these pillars started to weaken. Conformity pressures might still exist, but the feeling of shared security eroded. Welfare systems faced strain, institutions showed signs of fragility. The conviction that things would carry on indefinitely faded. That image of a coherent, thinking, feeling society with a common destiny started to shrink, vanish. Without that shared conviction, the word society lost its grounding. It became, as Ulrich Beck called it, a zombie category, a word still used but increasingly detached from any real lived experience of a unified whole. It was, as Jacques Derrida suggested, being used sous retour, under erasure, a signifier outliving its signified. Fast forward another half-century. Sociology, following thinkers like Foucault, often focused on models of power and control. Bentham's panopticon, the managed factory, the administered society. These concepts captured the essence of modernity as a project of design and oversight. But then Great Transformation Mark II hit. The very realities these theories described started to unravel. The grand ambitions of social engineering, the belief in large-scale management and control, began to fade. Thinkers like Lyotard talked about the death of grand narratives. Peter Drucker bluntly stated no more salvation by society. And then Margaret Thatcher famously declared, there is no such thing as society. Even James Burnham's earlier assertion that management was the key to power seemed increasingly hollow. The era of confident, centralized control was clearly receding. So what replaced this centralized control? Interestingly, it wasn't necessarily less control, but a different kind of control. Management shifted tactics. Instead of micromanaging and constant supervision, the focus moved to empowering employees, encouraging self-direction, and relying on performance metrics. Managers started passing the buck, making it the employees' responsibility to prove their value and stay relevant. The old panopticon, designed to keep people in line, was being dismantled or repurposed to keep people out. Think exclusionary hiring practices rather than inclusive monitoring. As Daniel Cohen observed, the lines blurred. No more simple boss-subordinate relationship, just individuals navigating tasks together. This shift created a dynamic where responsibility, once held by managers, now largely fell onto the shoulders of those previously managed. It looked like empowerment, but often manifested as increased pressure on individuals to constantly justify their worth. This shift brings us to a classic mixed blessing. On one hand, individual autonomy and rights have arguably expanded dramatically. People have more choices, more freedom to pursue their own paths. On the other hand, this newfound freedom comes with a heavy dose of insecurity. Individuals are left largely on their own to navigate life, bearing full responsibility for their careers, finances, and futures. There's no longer a guaranteed safety net provided by stable institutions or lifelong roles. As Richard Sennett puts it, this leads to disjointed time where short-term projects dominate, making it hard to build a coherent life story or stable character. Commitment becomes an abstract virtue, something you hear about but don't see practiced. Boltanski and Chiapello capture this perfectly. The security of the past, tied to status, hierarchy, and fixed career tracks, has evaporated, replaced by a frantic chase for the next short-lived project, each promising little more than a chance to move on to the next. How does society integrate people in this fragmented landscape? Boltanski and Chiapello suggest it's through a shifting allegiance to a multitude of projects. Integration happens not through adherence to overarching norms, but through constantly jumping from one temporary gig to the next. Control shifts from top-down regulation to market logic. Instead of command, you have seduction, allure, public relations. Surveillance is replaced by creating desire, making people want what the system offers. And the most potent tool, the ever-present specter of uncertainty. As Ralph Waldo Emerson observed about skating on thin ice, our safety is in our speed. Keeping people anxious, insecure, and constantly striving makes them more pliant, more willing to accept whatever comes next. This fosters a culture of inconsequentiality, where choices are made to avoid limiting future options, commitment is feared, and flexibility becomes the prized skill. Living becomes a series of biographical solutions to systemic contradictions, even if those solutions are rarely found. Michel Foucault, anticipating some of these shifts, offered a different metaphor for understanding power and self-government: pilotage. Think of navigating a ship. It captures the essence of souci de soi, the lifelong process of self-care, self-concern, self-improvement. Unlike Durkheim's society, which felt like a pre-designed map with fixed rules, pilotage emphasizes choice. You choose your destination, you learn the navigation skills, You're aware of the storms and reefs, you know the journey is uncertain, and you're ready to change course. It highlights the journey, the ongoing effort of self-management, rather than arriving at a final, predetermined port. This metaphor resonates much more with the fluid, uncertain, choice-laden world we seem to be entering, a world far removed from Durkheim's confident assertion of irresistible social facts dictating our path. So, if Durkheim's sociology, rooted in managerial reason and the power of social facts, feels inadequate for today's world, how do we reconnect sociology with the real social agenda? Franz Rosenzweig offers a clue by distinguishing between two modes of thinking. There's logical thinking. Thinking for yourself, speaking to no one, detached, seeking neat order, avoiding messy engagement. It's tempting because it keeps you safe from the complexities of life, and academics love it because it sounds objective. Rosenzweig called this apoplexia philosophica, the philosophical stroke that paralyzes thought. Then there's grammatical thinking. This is thinking for someone, speaking to someone. It's bound by time, nourished by dialogue, takes cues from others, and acknowledges that something happens in conversation. For sociology to be relevant today, it needs to embrace this grammatical mode. It means being open to dialogue, seriously listening to people's concerns, admitting we don't have all the answers, and letting the problems people face shape our research. Authority isn't assumed, it's earned through genuine engagement. Let's bring this back to Durkheim, specifically his concept of solidarity. Mark Clatus picks up here, asking how Durkheim's ideas resonate in today's globalized democratic age. Think about September 11th. Amidst the horror, a wave of shared grief and unity swept across America, a stark reminder of social solidarity, even for those who felt disconnected pinchers. This raises questions. How do we recognize this solidarity in everyday life, not just in crises? What does it mean for democracy, with its inherent diversity? Can solidarity exist amidst difference? Cornel West uses the jazz band metaphor beautifully. True solidarity isn't uniformity, but a dynamic interplay of individuality and consensus, creative tension leading to collective achievement. This echoes Durkheim's challenge. How can we foster a solidarity that respects individual rights and diverse identities, yet enables cooperation on vital shared goals like justice and environmental protection? How does Durkheim help us think about solidarity in a pluralistic world? For Durkheim, solidarity wasn't just a nice idea, it was central to his entire project. From his earliest work to his final masterpiece, Elementary Forms of Religious Life, he sought to understand the sources and forms of human solidarity, solidarité. He defined it as the enduring source of social identity and fellowship. Crucially, he saw religion not necessarily in the traditional sense, but broadly as shared beliefs, norms, and rituals that shape a collective moral universe as the key to solidarity. Life for Durkheim is fundamentally life together, a direct challenge to the dominant individualistic philosophies of his time. He argued that as societies evolve, different types of solidarity emerge, from mechanical solidarity of simpler societies based on similarity, to organic solidarity of complex societies based on interdependence. Understanding these forms was key to understanding social cohesion and the challenges of modernity. So, wrapping up, Durkheim gave us a powerful lens to view society, morality, and the bonds that hold us together. His work on social facts, solidarity, and the role of institutions remains foundational. However, as Bauman and others show, the world he analyzed has changed profoundly. The solidarity of his time feels increasingly elusive. The very concept of society as a unified entity faces challenges. Yet, revisiting Durkheim, understanding both his insights and their limitations in light of contemporary fragmentation, uncertainty, and the rise of the individual remains incredibly valuable. His framework helps us critically examine the ongoing tension between individuality and collective life, a tension that defines our social landscape today.